Having a koi pond in your backyard can be very relaxing. In our pond, we have koi, shibunkins, and goldfish. And of course, if the pond is next to your master bedroom, you'll need a waterfall so you can go to sleep listening to the sound of running water. Unfortunately, if you have a waterfall, eventually you'll need to do some waterfall repair. My waterfall is constructed with several flat rocks held together by mortar. When you run a large volume of water over it, there's no issues because the water doesn't actually go across the rock. I actually only run this much water when I'm outside enjoying my pond. Normally, this is how much water is going across it 24 hours a day. We do this for water filtration and aeration of the water. But when you have water flowing across mortar, problems occur. The mortar starts to erode, and it will do this the full length of the waterfall. Just like in nature, you can even have tunnels formed inside your waterfall. Figuring out where pond leaks are can be a bit tricky. You can do things like look for water seepage, calcium buildup, even isolate different parts of the pond, then watch the water level to see if it drops. I finally figured out my leak is somewhere in this part of the waterfall. I'm going to have to tear it apart and rebuild. The first step of the repair is you've got to clean all the algae out of it. The tool for this is your trusty pressure washer. This will also remove all the loose mortar. A wet-dry shop vac works perfectly for removing all the excess water and stuff that you broke loose. As I mentioned earlier, I isolated each of the waterfalls. I had a visible leak here when only the top waterfall was running, and calcium buildup here telling me this has been happening for a long time. So I'm going to remove all of this rockwork. The tool for that is my trusty roto hammer. Before I do this, I want to isolate the fish from the pond I'm working on. The waterfall is in the right-hand pond. It's connected to the pond on the left-hand side by a big underground pipe. I can cap off this pipe and isolate the two ponds. I then move all the fish over to the pond I'm not working on and ensure they have plenty of aeration. I can now get to work. Breaking each rock loose is relatively easy. The more difficult part of the task is chipping away at all the old mortar. As you chip away each layer, how it was leaking becomes more clear. Here we can see the water made it all the way to the back of the waterfall, which means during the next freeze it would expand and break that rock loose. Before mortaring, I stacked all the rocks into place to figure out where they were going to go. Then carefully disassembled the stack, memorizing where each rock will go while I'm mortaring. When you have wet mortar is not the time to be trying to figure out where each rock has to go. Keep in mind your original plan is only a guide. As you add the thickness of the mortar, that's going to change how the rocks lay out in relationship to each other. But with a little bit of tweaking, it'll eventually work. After I place each rock, I make sure it's level. This is on every single layer. This makes each layer above the one you're working on much easier to build. Something you want to consider. I get an awful lot of birds that come in and take baths in my waterfall. So what I'm doing here is making gently sloping rocks going down into the main water. That way they can land on the side, then walk down into the water. After I did this, the number of birds taking baths here significantly increased. Finally, you want to backfill every single crack in the waterfall with mortar. This is a pretty messy project, so I use plastic to catch all the mortar that dropped down. Don't worry about getting mortar on the rocks, we'll take care of that later. Since I did this repair in the summer, it was considerably hot out. So several times a day I'd go out and I'd mist the mortar with water. This slowed down the rate the mortar was curing and hopefully helped keep it from cracking. I did this for about a week. After the mortar is completely cured, I used wire brushes to take all the excess mortar off the rocks. For rapid removal, a wire brush on a drill motor works wonderfully. However, there's going to be places your drill won't fit, so you'll have to resort back to Mr. Manuel, as in manual labor. Yes, I will agree with you. This was an extremely slow and arduous process. But keep remembering, the cleaner the rocks are, the better your waterfall is going to look. If there's still some residue on the rock, don't worry, our next process will take care of that. We'll be using waterproof paint during this project. However, if we take a look at the instructions on the back of the can, we'll see we have to do a little more work before we can paint. Concrete and mortar have crystal-like deposits called efflorescence that needs to be removed before you can paint. To do this, you use something called muriatic acid. This stuff is actually just a diluted sulfuric acid, kind of like you used to use in science class back in school. You'll want to put it into a spray bottle and spray it directly onto the rock and mortar. You can see the vapors that are coming off of this stuff. Make darn sure you have proper protective equipment, including a respirator. Do not breathe those vapors. In addition to removing the efflorescence, it's also eating away at that extra mortar that you missed when you're trying to clean the rocks. Notice how it all turned yellow. Here we can see after I sprayed the acid, you can actually see it bubbling as it eats away at the excess mortar. After the vapors and bubbling are all gone, simply rinse with water to clean it all off. After you've rinsed, it's so diluted that it's probably not dangerous anymore. You can clean it out with your wet-dry shop vac. Oh, and I don't think I have to remind you, make sure your fish are nowhere around this process. While your waterfall is drying out from your last step, now is the time to clean up the bottom pond. I did notice while I was troubleshooting, there is water leaking out of the pond itself. First, we need to clear all the algae. And just like you did in the waterfall, the tool for this is the pressure washer and a shop vac. Any place that's going to have standing water needs to have a layer of waterproof paint on it. In my case, that's the main bottom pond and the two sediment catching basins on the waterfall. The basins are nice because you just vacuum them out periodically, and it keeps the pond much cleaner with a lot less maintenance. Use waterproof epoxy to cover up any cracks in your concrete. For this waterproof paint to actually work, you may need to apply 2 to 3 coats. This is because as you're painting over mortar, air pockets form which makes pinhole leaks in the paint. The additional layers cover those pinholes. I alternate color between gray and blue so I can verify I have proper coverage. Once the algae grows on the walls, you won't be able to see the color anyway. And just like the muriatic acid, you do not want to be breathing these paint fumes, so have plenty of ventilation. If you look real close, you can see those pinhole leaks I was talking about in my first coat. And here's how I can find the leaks in my main pond. As you're painting, the water leaks back out of the concrete and shows you where the leak was. It's time to break out the waterproof epoxy that was designed specifically for concrete. And this time around I tried something new. I'm putting a layer of epoxy on the mortar between my rocks and the waterfall. I'm hoping this will significantly slow down the erosion of the mortar, so I don't have to do this job again anytime soon. Oh, and once the algae grows again, you won't even see the epoxy. Hang in there, we're almost done. All of these chemicals that we've used, mortar, muriatic acid, epoxy, paint, all vent residual stuff that's bad for fish. That stuff's what's causing the bubbles. So I flushed the pond several times until the bubbles no longer appear below the waterfall. And that's about it. Now you can move your fish back over and start enjoying your pond again. Oh yeah, don't forget to strip, clean, and repaint the other pond. Well, thanks for watching.